On today's episode of World Explained, Ukraine officials have devised a plan to reclaim control of Crimea from Russia. Russia assumes the UN Security Council presidency and Ukraine is angry, and how Ukraine is building back Bucha as part of a resistance against Russian forces. But before we begin, I'll request everyone to like and subscribe. If you like the video, it helps tremendously and means a lot to us. And now, let's jump into Russia assuming the UN Security Council presidency without any further ado. While Russia might use its UNSC permanent member status to peddle an agenda, more on that later in the video. For now, a top Ukrainian official outlined a series of steps the government will take after reclaiming Crimea control. While the goal of taking back Crimea may sound far-fetched, there are signs that this might come sooner than anticipated. And while Crimea is away from all the explosions and destruction of the Donbas region, a very different war wages on in Crimea. One of the nighttime explosions, sabotage, and disinformation. The Ukrainian military has been carrying out attacks in Crimea with two goals: harass the Russian Black Sea Fleet and disrupt vital Russian supply lines. Satellite imagery in February showed a substantial Russian buildup of equipment and armor at several points across northern Crimea. While we only see satellite imagery, only occasionally can we know the reason behind such fortification. Unofficial social media videos provide clues about what has been hit, and only sometimes do circumspect Ukrainian officials refer to any actions in Crimea. This part of the conflict typically remains in the shadows, but last week, Ukraine's main intelligence reported that explosions in the Crimean town of Zankoy were due to a strike against Russian-caliber cruise missiles being transported via rail. It said the strike served to demilitarize Russia and prepare the Crimean Peninsula for deoccupation. So if such actions persist, Alexei Danilov's plan could soon be a reality. Moscow annexed Crimea from Ukraine in 2014, and while most of the world doesn't recognize Crimea as part of Russia, Russia still claims and governs it. While Mr. Danilov hinges on the reclamation of Crimea, Russia demands that Ukraine acknowledges Crimea as sovereign and acknowledges the land gained by Russia. The Kremlin is in no position to make those demands a reality, as Russian forces are losing or under tremendous pressure, and there is a very high chance that Ukraine will regain most of the land lost. So to achieve complete victory and reduce the risk of a future Russian attempt at invasion, Danilov suggested prosecuting Ukrainians who worked for the Moscow-appointed administration in Crimea, adding that some would face criminal charges, and others would lose government pensions and be banned from public jobs. He said on the same Facebook post that all citizens who moved to Crimea after 2014 should be expelled, and any real estate deals with them be nullified. As part of the plan, he also suggested dismantling the 19 kilometers, or 12 miles long bridge Russia built to connect Crimea to Russia. Last year, the bridge was very close to destruction when a truck bomb severely damaged it in October. Moscow was quick to blame Kiev for the attack. While Russia had to repair the bridge as it is an integral part of their supply line, Ukraine refused to take responsibility. Danilov also argued for renaming the city of Sevastopol, the main base for the Russian Black Sea Fleet since the 19th century. He said it could be called Object Number 6 before the Ukrainian parliament chooses another name, suggesting Akhtiar after a village that once stood where the city is now. Mikhail Razvashayev, the appointed head of Sevastopol by the Kremlin, called the plan sick, adding, "It would be wrong to treat comments by sick people seriously. They must be cured, and that's what our military is doing now," Razvashayev told the Russian state news agency TASS. This plan comes when Ukrainian troops will receive new weapons from the West, including dozens of battle tanks, to break through Russian defenses and claim what is rightfully theirs. The counteroffensive is expected as early as this month. Although in Ukraine, more civilians will be killed by the Russian military. If I were to be more precise, the Wagner Group, which has now been pushed into a corner in Bakhmut and relies on killing civilians. According to the Ukrainian military, Russia's latest rocket and artillery attacks have killed 4 civilians and wounded 15 others since Saturday. But I hope the war will not be prolonged for too long. And while some believe that the war will not end anytime soon, claiming the longer the fight goes on, the more Russia benefits, there is still a significant possibility Putin could fall before that. Unsurprisingly, a poorly executed draft of several 100,000 men has been unpopular, and there has been growing resentment. And it is unlikely that anyone will speak up against the ex-KGB agent, fearing his wrath. The army might likely collapse, like in World War I, where a poorly motivated and provisioned Russian army collapsed. helping bring down an out-of-touch czar since the Russian military is poorly motivated. Because, unlike President Zelensky, who frequently visits the front line, Putin stays hidden, impacting troop morale. Also in October, a British intelligence chief said Russian forces in Ukraine were overstretched and exhausted. Troops train at dilapidated bases, fight with obsolete equipment, and lack medical supplies. Soldiers complain of being sent into a meat grinder. Also, Ukraine might win before any previously mentioned things happen. It has already repelled Russian forces from several significant cities, like Kiev, Kharkiv, and Odessa. It has successfully taken back more than half of the area seized by Russia, barring the tanks mentioned earlier. The West has provided Ukraine with Stinger and Iris-T low-altitude anti-air missiles, HIMARS rocket artillery, and Patriot high-altitude air defenses, which will help Ukraine to reclaim its territory quickly and efficiently. Moving on to something Russia finds beneficial, Russia got the UNSC presidency. The last time Russia had the presidency of the UN Security Council was in February 2022, when it launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And even though President Putin is now a wanted man with an arrest warrant for human rights abuses, nothing could be done to stop Russia from assuming the role of UNSC president. Each council member country takes up the presidency on a monthly rotating pattern, and despite Ukraine's complaints, the US or any other country can't block Russia as it is a permanent council member. While the role is primarily procedural, Moscow's ambassador to the UN, Vasily Nebenchia, told the Russian TASS news agency that he planned to oversee several debates, including one on arms control. Importing arms is one of the sticking points for Russia and one of the reasons for Moscow's failing invasion, as it is running out of ammo and other necessary military equipment. Also, the bureaucracy and the sluggishness in which the top brass responds have a significant role to play. But I digress. Nebenchia also said to TASS that he would be discussing a new world order that would replace the existing unpopular one. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba called Russia's presidency the worst joke ever for April Fool's Day, and a stark reminder that something is wrong with how international security architecture is functioning, and further commented on Saturday that Russia gaining the presidency is a slap in the face to the international community. Ukraine's presidential advisor, Mikhailo Podolyak, said the move was another violation of international law as an entity that wages an aggressive war, violates the norms of humanitarian and criminal law, destroys the UN Charter, neglects nuclear safety, can't head the world's essential security body. And President Zelensky called for the UNSC to reform or dissolve, accusing it of failing to take action to prevent Russia's invasion, while also calling for Russia's member status to be revoked. But the U.S. said that its hands were tied as the UN Charter doesn't allow the removal of permanent members. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre told a news briefing this week, "Unfortunately, Russia is a permanent member of the Security Council, and no feasible international legal pathway exists to change that reality," adding that she expects Moscow to continue to use its seat in the council to spread disinformation and propaganda justifying its invasion of Ukraine. The UNSC is responsible for maintaining peace, and 5 nations are permanently represented on the Council, reflecting the post-war power structure that held sway when the Council was formed. The member countries work alongside 10 non-permanent member countries. But the problem with Russia's permanent member status is that not only can it not be kicked off the Council, but it can also veto resolutions. While Russia influences the decisions taken, it will now be responsible for the agendas, and the Kremlin said on Friday it planned to exercise all its rights in the role. The White House urged Russia to conduct itself professionally when it assumes the role. On Friday, White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre said, "A country that flagrantly violates the UN Charter and invades its neighbor has no place on the UN Security Council. This is a sentiment I agree with, as Russia is currently breaching the Charter with its ongoing war, yet gets to be the president. However ceremonial the role may be, the invasion of Ukraine is a flagrant violation of the Charter, and Russia's member status should be revoked for it." Despite the UNSC situation, the Ukrainians have an unwavering determination and spirit to fight back, and even those not on the front lines resist the Russian forces by bringing Bucha back to life. In Bucha, standing on the crumbling roof of a house, dozens of workers hammering in unison. Around them, cranes, bulldozers, and trucks work frantically to repair roads and buildings destroyed by Russian artillery. It is hard to believe that about a year ago, the bodies of dozens of civilians brutally killed by Russian soldiers were strewn over almost a mile, some with their hands bound behind their backs. Ukraine has already rebuilt or repaired sites obliterated by Russian forces. This will be the most extensive rebuilding effort since World War II, with an estimated cost of $500 billion. Ukraine has mostly rebuilt the city, but Moscow destroyed some of the sites, including bridges, roads, and government buildings remain. And it is to be seen how a previously corrupt government deals with such a sudden and high influx of money. Under the Marshall Plan, the U.S. program that provided economic assistance to restore the infrastructure of post-war Europe, Washington contributed $13.3 billion in aid to 16 countries, says Donald Bowser, the founder of Support to Ukrainian Recovery Initiative, an NGO focused on recovery projects in formerly occupied areas of Ukraine. That's approximately $150 billion, or 121 billion pounds in today's dollars. Rebuilding Ukraine could cost the West 4 or 5 times as much. Nobody has ever invested all this money to reconstruct a single country. Early in July last year, President Zelensky said restoring Ukraine would begin before the conflict ended. He seems to have delivered on his promise, so hopefully the officials of Ukraine will focus more on rebuilding and helping the masses, and less on filling their pockets. One of the most iconic images of the war dates back to early March 2022. The photo featured hundreds of civilians crowded together under the remains of a critical bridge that connected Irpin to the city of Bucha, which at that moment held those people suspended between life and death. On the one hand, the Russian artillery advancing from the north. On the other, the safety on the road to Kiev. A year on, dozens of workers have nearly completed its restoration, and I hope Ukraine continues on this path and restores its cities and people's lives to normalcy. That's all for today. Thank you for sticking to the very end. If you enjoyed the video and found it informative, please click the link and subscribe to our channel. Until next time, goodbye.